Thank you now. And now it's time for our panel of experts. It's great and an honor to be with all of you to discuss, this world of generics and various communities. Let me just start with Tammy and the Black Women's Health Imperative. And Tammy, I just said, what a giant you worked with in John Lewis. And so I'm inclined to sort of start there and ask, if John Lewis were with us today, such a major force, looking at basically inequality and the question of justice in our healthcare world. So as you think about the generics world and you think about our challenge in getting an equitable and just healthcare, platform out there, environment, what are the pieces that are most important to you?
Yes. So one of the most important issues is access for patients, access to life-saving therapies across all therapeutic areas. And I think, with the current environment with COVID, it's really shed a bright light on many of the inequities around disparities. As we know, many of us in healthcare already knew that these disparities were there. But I think we do have an opportunity in the current environment to begin to address those. And one is making sure that we provide access to life-saving drugs, complex generic drugs.
Well, thank you for that. What are some of the barriers there? Is it cost, or are there other systemic parts of this that are not in place, you think?
Yeah, so cost affordability is definitely one. But then generally speaking, not to just even look at that aspect, there's the social determinants of healthcare. And so as we begin to even look at ways and solutions, we have to take into account, do these patients have access to transportation? Do they have access, for example, for diabetes? African Americans are disproportionately impacted by type 2 diabetes. Black women specifically are 2-3 more times likely to have the disease. And so do they have access to, healthy food in their area? I know there's studies in Washington, D.C., Ward 7 and 8, the amount of grocery stores there are in the area. There's a lack of grocery stores in that area. And so really providing solutions that really will get to sort of the systemic issues of why there are those disparities.
Thank you. Dr. Patel, I know that you are also placed this question of how we get greater equality in healthcare provision and why we're not doing it. I want to give you an opportunity to say, as we're talking about this complex dimension, we're going to, get Tonya in this in a moment, kind of looking at allergy and asthma. And when you kind of look, everybody comes packaged with a certain set of issues that we need to deal with that need to be part of this. But what I'm fascinated by your work is you're saying that we're systemically marginalizing communities. We've been doing it for a long time. We have to fix that. What are the parts of this picture do you think we need to move?
Well, I think I'm glad. I first feel honored that you considered me to be the part of the team. And off the line, I was talking to Tammy as well. As an oncologist with a practice in rural South Carolina, I see the massive disparity with access to care, access to testing. And what Tammy brought up, the issue about the diabetes, there's a whole new global project called Genome-Wide Association Studies. They track the genomic analysis of different population funded by the federal governments across the world. And in the last release of the study in 2017, out of 35 million samples analyzed, 80% plus belong to the Northern European ancestry, probably about 2% to the African American ancestry. Now, this is a global, so if you look into the Northern European ancestry population makes less than 10%. So 80% plus resources are dedicated to studying the evolution of disease using genomics that includes cancer, diabetes, hypertension, drug addiction. So there's a massive global challenge. And even after President Biden Obama in 2015 announced the Precision Medicine Initiative, we are far from achieving that. And the problem is, if we do not understand the complex factors of what we call environmental epigenetics, how chronic stress, how chronic discrimination leads to genomic changes that perpetuate below the generation. So we are not only exposing the generation to less privileged status, but we are also perpetuating by giving it to the future generations, which results in obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and cancer. So we have to make a global systemic approach to understand the impact of the environmental factors, social determinants of health onto the genetics, which then get passed on to the future. But the second implication is when you develop the drug. For example, drug A may work very well in a group of people, but drug B may not work as well in the same group of patients. So we can't generalize that hypertension drug will work same in Caucasian, Asian, Indian, or African American. So this is a systematic issue. And as incoming co-op president, as well as somebody has a leadership role at different level, I've taken the precision medicine initiative and the disparity at the top of my priority list.
Well, thank you. Real quick before I jump to Tonya, and just very fast answer, if you would mind, Dr. Patel. As you talk about different drugs, different communities, one of the questions that came up with Dr. Sally Choi is whether or not we need to have more data sharing, more data acceptance and trust, if you will, across national lines. There's been some discussion of why Europe and Canada have certain complex generics available to their patients, but they're not available in the U.S. Do you think there's a breakdown there, or do you think it's sort of, about right?
No, it's actually, there are so many silos here. Everyone wants to preserve their kind of data identity. And that actually, again, perpetuates the problem that we face. And I want to add one more topic about complex generics, because people think that, how about $100 saving may not be huge, but to my patient living in Chester, South Carolina, whose truck frequently breaks up on way to my clinic, $100 saving may make 7% of his monthly income. So we just can't look at the amount of saving. People discount it. $100 may not make a difference. Yes, it may not make a difference to this audience, but to someone who's most underprivileged, it matters most. And Mahatma Gandhi had once said that you judge the civilized society by looking at how they treat their most vulnerable population and not how they treat their wealthiest person.
Well, thank you. Tonya, you represent vulnerable populations, those people with allergies, with asthma. You've been round the circuit before in case of running into a provision of a the EpiPen story is well known to folks, the drug involved there. I guess my question to you as we discuss what needs to be shifted in the generics landscape that can be shifted, as a patient advocate, what is the voice we should be hearing in this?
Right. Well, none of us have to remember too far back to think about the EpiPen situation that you spoke of. So 2018, again, a basic monopoly in the market with that branded product. What most people don't know is that it had been a 10-year process of trying to get a generic approved and through the process to actually have a generic in the market. And so what ended up happening, of course, was a 600% price increase that was oftentimes passed on to patients and those most vulnerable, as we've already heard. And so patients were going without this life-saving medication and taking chances every single time they ate as a result. And so what are some of the changes that we as a patient advocacy organization are recommending? First and foremost, we have to increase first cycle approvals. Currently, it's only 12% of applications that are approved in that first cycle. And in fact, most it takes 3 reviews or more. And each of those review cycles is upwards of 10 months. And so that's far too long. In the case of Advair, again, a very prominent treatment in our space of allergy and asthma, the 10-month delay that it took to get the first generic to market in that space cost patients and our system over $1 billion just in that 10-month delay. So these are the kind of examples in our space of allergy and asthma that indicate we must do something to change the process and to ensure greater transparency and communication in the process to get those first cycle approvals more readily acknowledged and adopted.
Right.
I also think we have to adopt some better guidance principles. And so that, of course, can often be an impediment to getting those cost-effective complex generics in the hands of patients.
Tonya, before I jump back to Tammy for a second, as you talk about first cycle approvals, just to play devil's advocate, not, I know you're advocating, but I guess the question that any normal person I think out there would ask is, are you sacrificing health and security at all? I mean, what are the, I had Sally Choi in there. I said, hey, is it, the process, working, your job is to produce, protect the public. So are there, I'm asking the advocate this, but are there dimensions of vulnerability from increasing those up that ought to also be on our radar screen?
Well, I think we absolutely cannot forego safety and efficacy, right? I mean, that is a given. But what I think that is more of concern are these PSGs and the updates to those PSGs that really are not as relevant, that do not impact safety and efficacy, but continue, if you will, to shift the target so that those complex generic manufacturers don't exactly know what they're trying to achieve in order to get through the regulatory process more readily. And I think this creates a lot of confusion, but also creates significant economic burden on those generic manufacturers that is unnecessary.
I really appreciate that. Tammy, I want to come to you. We're short on time. This is a great conversation, but I'm now reading your tweets, the Black Women's Health. I recommend everyone come look and educate yourself. Fascinating things that you're tweeting out there, one of which is just staggering. You write, know the facts. February is Heart Health Month. Basically, 1 in 2 Black women over the age of 20 have some form of heart disease. Unbelievable. To me, it's unbelievable. I think that's, very important to be aware of and know. Another one you write, only 10% of rare diseases have an FDA-approved treatment. Where therapies do exist, they can be prohibitively expensive for many families. There's a third dimension I've done programs on, which is Black maternal mortality. I guess the question, that I look at when I ask this, we're talking about complex generics, but the broad healthcare system, when we're looking at, what Dr. Patel has called as marginalized communities or vulnerable communities or communities where there have been a history of chronic diseases for a variety of reasons. You worked for John Lewis. What do we have to do to level the field in a real way? I just want to give you the power. If you would change a few things, wake some people up, what would you put on the table?
Yeah, definitely. And to that point, in the spirit of John Lewis, one of the things that, working for him as his legislative director was, the power of coalition building. And so really I've extrapolated that from, working with Congressman Lewis and at the Black Women's Health Imperative. We've developed, for example, a rare disease diversity coalition where we have the American Medical Association, the Black Doctors, which is the National Medical Association, the Hispanic physicians, the Native American physicians, as well as other stakeholder groups, and as well as industry to really come up with formal solutions to addressing some of these real issues. For example, why is there a delay in diagnosis for minorities with rare diseases? We are also created a Sickle Cell Diversity Coalition. And we're, definitely, you mentioned maternal mortality. We're definitely at the forefront and working with Congresswoman Underwood and Congresswoman Adams and Senator Cory Booker on really addressing the Black maternal crisis. And so, similar, it's about access. In terms of complex generics, we've attended several of the stakeholder meetings, making sure that we continue to advocate and really look through an equity lens. I think that's what's important too, is that, with President Biden, he recently signed several executive orders around equity. So really bringing an equity lens to the conversation, I think is very key as we go forward.
Thank you for that. Dr. Patel, one quick last word, if we can. I was very taken with what you just talked about diminishing the cost of, X product and what an incredible impact that would make on the life of one of your patients in rural Carolinas. I guess my question is to you, what tools do you most need, whether it's, more generics? What are the elements that you think, speaking for your patients, that we should hear and understand? Because I think that these human stories matter a lot, but just in real brief form, what should our viewers and listeners hear about making healthcare fairer, more affordable, and getting the picture right?
So at the micro level, at the perspective level, I think affordable access to cancer care is a fundamental equal right, not the privilege. I think we fail as a nation if we don't do that. And at a macro level, I think we have to have a coalition. And I'm in the process of building a coalition called Precision Medicine Alliance for Minorities in South Carolina, because we have a lot of underserved population. So I've taken the broad and very bold initiative of building it up. and recognize the problem, find out the solution, and disseminate the information. These are the three. I always stick to the facts and not to the opinions.
Well, listen, I want to thank all of you. Fascinating conversation. Dr. Kashyap Patel, CEO of the Carolina Blood and Cancer Center. Tonya Winders, President and CEO of the Allergy and Asthma Network, and Tammy Boyd, Chief Policy Officer and Counsel of the Black Women's Health Imperative. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you'll come back because I want to continue this conversation in further iterations. I'm sure we're going to come back to this discussion again. Thank you.
So I definitely want to send information. I want to come back because I'm touched and moved by disparities across the country. And because large number of my patients are underserved, I really want to take this as a national issue.
Great panel. I'll say all three of you are doing that. Thank you. Thank you, Tonya and Tammy, as well.